and welcome to our discussion of USCIS site visits. My name is Emily Newman, immigration attorney with Ruddy & Newman PC, located in Houston, Texas. Before we begin, I'd like to inform you that the information I'm about to provide is not to be construed as legal advice for your specific situation. For specific advice on your situation, please contact an attorney. This information should not be construed as legal advice and does not constitute an engagement with Ruddy & Newman PC or establish an attorney-client relationship. To get started, I want to first let you know what FDNS is and how it came about. FDNS stands for Fraud Detection and National Security. This is an office within USCIS that was basically created in order to seek out fraud in the H-1B visa program. It consists of about 650 immigration officers, intelligence specialists, and analysts. In addition, USCIS has contracted with various private investigation firms, and oftentimes it is these private investigators that are the ones conducting the site visit with various employers who employ H-1B workers. The budget for this program is derived from the $500 fraud fee which is paid by employers every time a new H-1B petition is filed. It's important to note this fraud fee is also paid by employers filing L1 petitions for the initial petition, and it is expected in the near future that this program will soon be expanded to the L1 visa program. Last year, approximately 5,000 site visits were conducted by FDNS. And it's expected that in 2010, this is going to increase fivefold. So there will likely be 25,000 site visits this year alone. To give you a little bit of background as to why this program came about, in September 2008, the USCIS conducted an H-1B benefit fraud and compliance assessment. In that study, they took a random sample of about 250 cases that were filed in 2005 and 2006. They visited all of those petitioners, the employers that filed those petitions. They interviewed the employers, they interviewed the employees that were available, and they came up with some results regarding how likely fraud is in the H-1B program. And they were alarmed to discover that approximately 21% of those cases that were filed were either had fraud involved or technical violations. So when you extrapolate that number out to the overall number of H-1B petitions filed, it's close to 20,000 petitions that likely have some type of violation. So because of that, the site visit program began in order to try to cut down on the amount of fraud. Some of the types of violations that were found during this initial assessment in 2008 were where the job location where the employee is actually working was not listed on the I-129 or the LCA when the application is filed. So that's a situation where, for example, the petition is filed and a year or two later the job location changes and no LCA was updated in that situation. It's questionable whether this would be considered fraud or misrepresentation. The regulations do allow for changes in job location as long as you obtain the proper LCA and pay the prevailing wage. However, I think in these particular cases it rose to a much higher level than simply just a location change that happens later on down the line. Another type of violation was where the prevailing wage was not paid to the worker. There were several instances of fraudulent or forged documents. In quite a few cases, it was determined that the business location was either non-existent, that's the location that was listed on the I-129 petition, or it was found that it was more of a storefront or just a shell business there, and there were in fact no actual operations being carried out at that location. Many of the violations included jobs where the position described in the petition was nothing like the work that was actually being carried out by the H-1B worker. Some of these cases were actually already under ICE investigation, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And there were several instances of misrepresentation of H-1B status. These were instances where the H-1B worker was already terminated, left the country, but then came back on the same visa, informing the port of entry that they were still continuing to work for that employer when in fact that employer had terminated their employment months before. And there were several instances where the worker was actually required to pay the filing fees for the H-1B petition. So based on this assessment, they were able to come up with several indicators or factors that they determined these are higher, more likelihood of fraud being involved. And so they found that employers with less than 25 employees were more likely to have some sort of violation. Also, firms with gross income of less than $10 million were also found to be more likely to have a violation or be fraudulent. Also, if the employer has not been in existence as long, especially less than 10 years, this is a likely indicator of possible fraud. And there were certain occupations also that were likely to be fraudulent, and those were mostly in accounting, human resources, business analyst positions, sales, and advertising. Finally, they did find that there was a higher percentage of fraud or violations in the bachelor's quota versus the graduate degree quota. That's not to say that people with a graduate degree are less likely to commit fraud. It just happened that that's how their numbers came out. So based on these indicators, USCIS seems to be using these indicators in new adjudications to determine whether fraud is likely and whether they should refer that application to FDNS for a potential site visit or other investigation. So I want to give you some information about what happens during a site visit and what you can expect. First of all, these visits usually occur after the case has already been approved and the worker has started working. They are usually unannounced, where an investigator will simply show up at the company location without calling beforehand, because they want to basically catch you off guard. Sometimes it will be more than one investigator as well that show up. It's usually at your place of business, but if you listed on your petition that the employee would be working at a client location or a location other than your headquarters, it's definitely possible that the investigators will show up at that second location as well. We have seen some instances where they actually don't physically come to your premises, but they will set up a phone call or even email the president of the company, whatever email address was listed on the forms, and ask for a list of documents just to confirm the validity of a certain application that was filed. It seems that most of these are randomly selected, but as I said, if those fraud indicators are present, it may be possible that during the adjudication, the officer might actually pass this application on to the FDNS unit to do some additional investigations. So to give you an idea of what happens during the actual site visit, they typically last about 15 to 30 minutes. Some can take longer, but I would say most of the time it's about 15 minutes. Usually the visits are prompted by one particular case, and as I mentioned, these are usually randomly selected. The whole purpose of this program is again to detect fraud, so they tend to cast the net very wide and just randomly select cases across the board and hope that they catch somebody who's doing things improperly. So at this time I will stop at this moment, and we will pick up again in the next download.